What happens when a neighbor's petty grudge kills the very system protecting her entire community? In Florida, one late-night act of vandalism turned an HOA feud into a full-blown security crisis. Picture this: a quiet subdivision just outside Orlando, Florida, the kind of place where neighbors wave in the mornings and kids ride bikes down the cul-de-sac without a care in the world. Nothing dramatic ever really happens here. At least that's what people thought. Until one night, someone took a bucket of paint and climbed onto a roof with one mission: to cover another homeowner's solar panels in thick, black strokes. At first glance, it sounds petty. A personal grudge, maybe even a weird prank. But here's the thing: no one knew. Those panels didn't just power one family's home, they powered the neighborhood's security system. Every camera, every light, every safeguard people thought they could count on. The homeowner was Andre Whitfield, a 42-year-old father of two who worked as a project manager for an engineering firm in downtown Orlando. He wasn't trying to make a statement when he put those panels up. He wasn't trying to irritate anyone. In his mind, he was making a smart investment, cutting down his electricity bill, reducing his carbon footprint, and quietly doing his part for the environment. But for his neighbor, Linda Caraway, it was personal. Linda wasn't just any neighbor. She sat on the HOA board, and over the years, she had built herself a reputation, one that didn't exactly inspire warmth. People said she had filed more complaints than anyone else in the subdivision. Trash cans left out too long, kids' basketball hoops near the street, cars parked slightly over the sidewalk. If it bothered her, she wrote it up. So when Andre's panels went up, gleaming under the Florida sun, Linda called them an eyesore. At HOA meetings, she would point to pictures she took from different angles of the street, emphasizing how the panels ruined the harmony of the neighborhood's appearance. Most people rolled their eyes and moved on. But Linda didn't move on. On a humid Thursday night, long after most of the neighbors were asleep, Linda pulled her silver sedan into Andre's driveway. A 5-gallon bucket of black exterior paint sat in her trunk, along with a roller attached to an extension pole. She glanced around, heart racing, hands trembling with adrenaline. Then she dragged the pole across the shingles, coating one panel after another in thick, shiny black. She didn't care that paint dripped down the roof. She didn't care that she could be caught. She was certain she was protecting property values. The next morning, Andre didn't notice right away. He was rushing out the door, late for a meeting, but his wife Marlene spotted it. She stood in the driveway, squinting up at the roof, and yelled, "Andre!" "What happened to the panels?" Andre dropped his briefcase, stunned. "What do you mean, what happened?" He called back. When he turned to look, his stomach sank. The panels, his $10,000 investment, looked ruined. At first, he thought it was vandalism by kids, maybe some teenagers messing around. But as he called the police to report the damage, part of him wondered if this was bigger. His gut told him Linda had something to do with it. After all, she had complained about those panels from the very beginning. But the true consequences of that night didn't show up until later. A few days passed, and neighbors began noticing strange changes. Security lights near the mailboxes started flickering, then went completely dark. Cameras at the entrances of the subdivision stopped working. Families who checked the HOA's online security feed found only black screens where clear images used to be. "Is anyone else's camera system down?" One neighbor, Thomas Green, asked in the community Facebook group. Within minutes, replies poured in. Everyone was having the same problem. Andre read through the comments with growing alarm. He hadn't told anyone that his panels powered the system. It was just a deal he'd struck quietly with the HOA months before. They paid him a small monthly stipend, and in exchange, the system pulled from his setup. It had been working perfectly. Until now. He posted cautiously, "I think I know what's going on. Can we meet tonight to talk about it?" That evening, a dozen neighbors gathered in Andre's driveway. The sticky Florida air clung to their clothes, and mosquitoes hovered under the street lamp that was now dead. Andre cleared his throat, his voice steady but heavy. "The security system runs on my panels. When someone painted over them, it cut power. That's why everything's down." The crowd went quiet. Eyes darted from one face to another. Then Thomas asked the question, but Andre had no idea that the fallout from that night would spiral into something far bigger than a neighborhood argument. Andre Whitfield wasn't the kind of guy who looked for trouble. Most of his neighbors in the subdivision off Colonial Drive knew him as the man who waved at the school bus every morning, jogged with his Labrador named Duke, and spent Saturdays helping his kids with their soccer practices. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud, he was steady, reliable. Born and raised in Jacksonville, Andre grew up in a working-class family that prized hard work and practicality. His dad was an electrician, his mum a nurse, and they drilled into him that every decision should be about building something better for the future. By the time he bought his Orlando home in his early 40s, he had that mindset ingrained. So when the idea of solar panels came up, it wasn't about making a statement, it was about taking care of his family. One night at dinner, Andre explained it to his wife, Marlene. "Look, babe, the panels pay for themselves in a few years. Our electricity bill drops. And there's an option to connect them to the HOA security system. They'll pay us a stipend every month." Marlene raised her eyebrow, skeptical. "You're telling me the whole neighborhood would rely on our roof?" Andre chuckled, pushing his plate away. "It's not as dramatic as it sounds. It's just a backup source, really. But it saves them money, and it pays us a little extra. Win-win." Their two kids, 12-year-old Jordan and 9-year-old Kayla, had chimed in with excitement. "Does that mean we're running the lights for everyone?" "Like superheroes?" Jordan asked, his eyes wide. Andre grinned. "Something like that." The decision was made. The installation went smoothly, and for months, everything worked better than expected. Andre felt proud every time he pulled into his driveway and saw the sleek panels lined across the roof, catching the sunlight. He didn't flaunt it, but he knew it was a smart move. Still, Andre wasn't blind to the whispers. At HOA meetings, he noticed side glances when Linda Caraway raised her hand to speak. "Solar panels look industrial," Linda would say, her voice sharp. "We're trying to maintain a certain aesthetic here. Do we really want to look like a science experiment?" Andre would sit back in his chair, jaw tight, resisting the urge to fire back. Marlene would place a hand on his arm under the table, silently urging him not to take the bait. One evening after a meeting, Thomas Green walked with Andre to their cars. Thomas, who had lived there for over 15 years, shrugged. "Don't let her get under your skin. She's complained about everything since I moved here. Last year it was people planting roses instead of hibiscus." "Roses?" Andre laughed, but deep down he understood something else. Linda's complaints weren't about the panels alone. They were about control. And she didn't like that something so important to the neighborhood was tied to him. Outside of HOA politics, Andre kept his life simple. He worked long hours downtown, but made sure to be home for dinner as often as possible. He coached Jordan's soccer team, helped Kayla with her science fair projects, and always fixed things around the house himself. His neighbors respected him. Many of them had borrowed his ladder, his tools, even asked his advice on repairs. Andre wasn't just the guy with the solar panels. He was the guy who showed up, which made the vandalism sting even more. To Andre, it wasn't just about the paint or the money it would take to clean the panels. It was about someone violating the trust he'd worked so hard to build. Someone had climbed onto his roof, onto his family's space, and deliberately sabotaged something that wasn't just for his benefit, but for the whole neighborhood's safety. That thought gnawed at him every time he drove home from work and looked up at the roof. He pictured Linda with her paint roller, convinced she was saving the neighborhood, when in reality she had put everyone at risk. One Saturday, as Andre cleaned his driveway, his neighbor Patricia Lane, a retired schoolteacher, stopped by. She shaded her eyes with her hand and said, "Andre, I've lived here 20 years. Never seen anything like this. People are scared, you know. Those cameras going dark? It's all anyone's talking about." Andre leaned on his broom, sweat dripping down his temples. "I never wanted this to be a problem. I thought the panels would make things better for everyone. Now it feels like it's blowing up in my face." Patricia gave him a sympathetic smile. "That's the thing about neighborhoods. One person's choices ripple out. Sometimes for good, sometimes not." Andre nodded, staring across the street at Linda's house. Her blinds were drawn, but he imagined her watching, listening, waiting. But what Andre didn't realize yet was that the neighborhood's patience was running out, and when the blackout collided with real danger, everything would explode. For years, the HOA meetings had been a mix of boredom and mild irritation. People showed up, signed their names on a clipboard, and sat through updates about landscaping budgets, parking violations, and noise complaints. Most left as soon as they could, muttering under their breath about rules that felt more like restrictions than community guidelines. But one person always seemed to thrive in that environment: Linda Caraway. Linda was in her late 50s, recently retired from a career in real estate. She had lived in the subdivision for almost 15 years and had a reputation that spread far beyond her street. If you asked around, neighbors would roll their eyes and say things like, "She called code enforcement because my grass was too long." Or, "She made me repaint my shutters because she said the shade of green wasn't approved." To Linda, though, she wasn't being difficult. She was preserving standards. She believed property values were a fragile thing, easily destroyed by small details. A car parked too long in a driveway, a lawn ornament that didn't match, solar panels gleaming under the sun. These were threats in her mind, cracks in the picture-perfect image she worked hard to maintain. At meetings, Linda's voice cut through the room. "If we let one person install whatever they want, where does it stop? Next thing you know, we'll have sheds, trampolines, satellite dishes sprouting up everywhere." We have to draw the line. Andre sat quietly during those rants, but inside, frustration simmered. He wasn't breaking rules. He'd gone through the proper channels, filed the paperwork, and received approval from the HOA's own committee. His panels were legal. But Linda kept treating him like he was some renegade neighbor undermining the neighborhood's integrity. The strange part was, most people didn't care. When Andre walked Duke in the mornings, neighbors stopped him to ask about the panels. "How much did they cost? Do they really save that much on your bill? Would you recommend them?" Conversations were curious, even supportive. But at meetings, when Linda spoke, no one wanted to pick a fight. People avoided her gaze, nodded along to move things forward, and went home complaining in private. One evening, Andre finally had enough. The meeting was dragging on, Linda was back on her solar panel tirade, and Andre raised his hand. "With all due respect, Linda, these panels don't hurt anyone. They lower my costs, they lower the HOA's costs, and they keep the lights on. If you think they're ugly, that's your opinion, but it doesn't mean they're wrong." Gasps rippled through the small room. Few people dared to confront Linda head-on. She stiffened, narrowing her eyes at Andre. "I'm not the only one who thinks they're ugly." She shot back. "I've heard from other neighbors." Andre leaned forward. "Then maybe they should say it to me directly, instead of hiding behind you." The room fell silent. For a moment, Andre thought he had gone too far. But then Thomas Green cleared his throat and said, "I actually think they're fine. Saves us money. That's all I care about." A couple of others murmured in agreement. Linda's face flushed red, but she moved on, flipping to the next item on her agenda. That was the first time Andre realized Linda didn't speak for everyone. She just spoke the loudest. Still, Linda didn't let it go. She made little comments in passing, muttered under her breath during walks, even complained to Marlene one afternoon while they were both at the mailbox. "I don't know how you can stand looking at those things every day," Linda said, forcing a smile. "I'd hate to have them right in my line of sight." Marlene kept her composure. "Well, I like seeing my bills go down, so I'll take the view." Moments like that built tension. Neighbors could feel it. They saw the way Linda's eyes lingered on Andre's roof every time she drove by. They heard the sharpness in her voice when she brought it up. Andre, meanwhile, tried to stay focused on his family. He told himself Linda's obsession was her problem, not his. But what he didn't know was that Linda had started venting to other HOA board members behind the scenes. She'd send long emails late at night with subject lines like, "Urgent, property values at risk," and "I saw at 1347 Colonial Oaks." Most of the board ignored her. But Linda wasn't looking for consensus anymore. She was looking for justification. And when she didn't get it, she took matters into her own hands. One night, after yet another meeting where no one supported her, Linda sat in her living room staring at her blinds, fixated on Andre's house across the street. The glow of his porch light illuminated the panels, gleaming under the moon. To her, they looked out of place, like a scar on the neighborhood. Her jaw clenched. She thought about the years she'd spent trying to keep things perfect, and how no one seemed to appreciate it. And in that frustration, she convinced herself of something dangerous. That Thursday night in late June was sticky and warm, the kind of Florida night where the air felt heavy on the skin. Most of the subdivision had gone quiet. Sprinklers clicked on, porch lights blinked off one by one, and the only sound left was the distant hum of cars on Colonial Drive. Inside her living room, Linda Carraway paced the carpet. Her blinds were tilted just enough for her to see Andre's roof across the street. The solar panels caught bits of moonlight, glimmering faintly. Each time she glanced at them, irritation clawed at her chest. She told herself she was doing this for the neighborhood, for everyone who was too polite or too afraid to say what they really thought. But deep down, it was about her control slipping away. On her kitchen counter sat a 5-gallon bucket of black exterior paint she'd bought earlier that week. She had practiced the story in her head. If anyone asked, she would say she was repainting her shutters. But that wasn't the real reason she bought it. Tonight, she had convinced herself the panels had to go. At 11:47 p.m., Linda slipped out her back door, careful not to let it slam shut. She loaded the bucket into her trunk, along with a roller attached to an extension pole, and eased her sedan across the street. The engine barely made a sound as she parked in Andre's driveway, her heart hammering so loudly she could hear it in her ears. For a moment, she sat there frozen, staring at the roof. Doubt crept in. What if someone saw her? What if the cameras caught her? Then she remembered. Those very cameras were connected to the panels. If she painted over them, they'd be useless. The irony emboldened her. She pulled on a pair of latex gloves, pried open the lid of the bucket, and dipped the roller in. Thick, black paint dripped down, spotting her driveway shoes. She cursed under her breath, then carried the pole up the side of the house, leaning it against the shingles. Climbing wasn't easy. Her knees ached, her palms slicked with sweat. But inch by inch, she made it onto the roof. From up there, the neighborhood looked eerie and still, the cul-de-sac bathed in silver light. She dipped the roller again, stretched it across the first panel, and dragged it slowly from corner to corner. The paint covered smoothly, blotting out the reflective surface. She repeated the motion, panel after panel, whispering to herself as if justifying it. This is for the good of the neighborhood. For the good of the neighborhood. Down below, a dog barked somewhere in the distance. Linda froze, crouching low, her pulse racing. She waited a full minute, breath shallow, until the barking faded. Then she returned to her work with renewed urgency. By the time she reached the 5th panel, sweat was dripping into her eyes, the roller heavy in her hands. She stopped to catch her breath, glancing over her shoulder. The subdivision still lay quiet, no lights flicking on, no neighbors stepping outside. She pressed on. Black paint smeared and dripped down the sides of the panels, staining the shingles. The clean, sharp look of Andre's system was disappearing under her strokes, each one erasing what she considered an eyesore. At 1:02 a.m., Linda stepped back, chest heaving, hands shaking from fatigue and adrenaline. Half the panels were coated, gleaming with wet paint. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough, she thought. Enough to stop them from working, enough to make her point. She climbed back down carefully, nearly slipping once as her shoe caught a slick patch of paint. When she reached the ground, she wiped her gloves on her jeans and shoved the roller into a trash bag. She lowered the trunk, slid into the driver's seat, and drove across the street as if nothing had happened. Inside her house, Linda washed her hands 3 times, scrubbing until her skin turned red. She threw the gloves in the trash, tied the bag shut, and placed it in the garage. Then she stood by her window again, staring out at Andre's roof. The panels were no longer gleaming. They looked dark and heavy, just as she wanted. For the first time in months, she smiled. She poured herself a glass of wine, sank into her couch, and whispered, "That'll teach him." What she didn't realize was that paint wasn't just ruining Andre's property. It was pulling the plug on the very system that kept her and every other neighbor safe. But Linda wouldn't understand the full weight of her actions until the neighborhood's peace was shattered by something far more frightening than a painted roof. The first signs of trouble didn't appear right away. On Friday morning, Andre rushed out the door for work, coffee in hand, hardly glancing at the roof. It was Marlene who spotted the mess when she backed the car out of the driveway. "Andre!" she shouted, leaning out the window. "Come look at this." He jogged over, briefcase still in hand, and followed her gaze upward. His stomach clenched. The panels were smeared in sloppy black paint, streaks running down the shingles like scars. Andre muttered under his breath, "You've got to be kidding me." He felt his pulse quicken, anger bubbling up as he imagined the cost of repairs. Marlene crossed her arms. "You know exactly who did this." Andre exhaled, jaw tight. "Yeah, I do." He called the police to report the vandalism, but the officer who showed up could only take down notes. No cameras had captured the act. The irony of that detail wasn't lost on Andre. "We'll file it, sir," the officer said flatly. "But unless someone confesses, it'll be hard to prove." Andre clenched his fists, feeling powerless. He spent the weekend calling solar companies, asking about cleanup costs. Every estimate came back high. Scrubbing paint off panels was tricky and often damaged them further. Replacing them outright could run into thousands. But by Sunday, another problem emerged. One Andre hadn't expected so soon. It started with the streetlight at the cul-de-sac entrance. Thomas Green noticed it first when he came home late from a dinner with friends. "Strangest thing," he said the next morning, standing in Andre's driveway. "The light by the gate was out last night. Pitch black. Almost missed the turn." Andre frowned, alarm bells going off in his head. Later that evening, Marlene checked the security feed the HOA kept online for residents. The cameras that usually showed the entrance and playground area had gone blank. Just static screens. By Monday morning, the neighborhood group chat was blowing up. "Anyone else's streetlight not working?" One message read, "Our feed's been down all weekend. Does anyone know what's happening with the cameras?" Andre's phone buzzed non-stop as neighbors voiced their worries. A few even wondered if it was some kind of hack. Andre hesitated but finally typed, "The system runs on my solar panels. They were vandalized last week. That's probably why everything's down." The responses came fast. "Wait, seriously? You mean our whole system depends on your roof? Who would vandalize them?" That evening, people began gathering in front of Andre's house. Lawn chairs scraped against the driveway, voices rising in heated speculation. Andre explained what had happened, careful not to point fingers, but he didn't need to. Everyone knew about Linda's complaints. The whispers spread quickly. She hated those panels. She's been talking about them for months. Meanwhile, the neighborhood grew darker. Without the solar feed, the security system struggled. The cul-de-sac lights blinked out one by one. Camera screens stayed dead. Families who once felt safe now double-checked their locks at night. Parents told their kids not to linger outside after sunset. On Tuesday, Patricia Lane called Andre in a hushed voice. "Andre, I don't mean to scare you, but last night I saw a car circling the street. Twice. Didn't recognize it. No plates on the front. It slowed down by the playground." Andre's chest tightened. "Did you call the sheriff's office?" "I did," Patricia said. "But without cameras, what can they do?" "They didn't even come out." Andre ran a hand through his hair, stress pounding in his temples. He knew Linda had crossed a line, but he hadn't anticipated how quickly the situation would spiral. His panels weren't just his, they were the neighborhood's first line of defense. That night, as he stood in his driveway staring at the dark panels, Andre's son Jordan came out holding Duke's leash. "Dad," he asked quietly, "are we safe?" Andre crouched down, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "We're safe," he said firmly, though doubt gnawed at him. He couldn't let his kids see his fear. The next morning, Thomas stopped Andre as he loaded his car for work. "Listen, I don't want to stir the pot, but people are talking about suing the HOA if this doesn't get fixed soon. Folks are scared, man. And when people get scared, they get angry." Andre nodded slowly, his mind racing. Lawsuits, police reports, suspicion spreading like wildfire, all because one person decided her opinion mattered more than everyone else's safety. But fear has a way of feeding itself, and the neighborhood's simmering tension was about to erupt the moment real danger knocked on their door. By Wednesday night, the neighborhood felt different. The usual glow of streetlights that once bathed the cul-de-sac in soft safety was gone. Driveways were shadows, mailboxes hidden in darkness, and the only light came from porch lamps residents kept on longer than usual. People whispered that the subdivision no longer felt safe, though most were reluctant to admit it out loud. That night, Patricia Lane was the first to notice something wasn't right. She had fallen asleep in her recliner with the TV flickering quietly, but a noise outside jolted her awake, tires crunching slowly over gravel. She shuffled to her window, peeking through the curtains. A dark sedan rolled down the street, stopping near the corner where the playground sat. The engine cut off, and for a long moment, nothing happened. Then two silhouettes stepped out. Patricia's heart raced. She reached for her phone and called Andre. "Hello?" Andre's groggy voice answered. "Andre," Patricia whispered urgently. "There are people out there." By the playground. They parked right under where the camera should be. "I can't see what they're doing." Andre was out of bed instantly. He pressed the phone tight to his ear. "Stay inside, Patricia." "I'll check." He threw on jeans and grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. Marlene trailed behind him, panic in her voice. "Andre, don't go out there. Call the police." "I will," he said, already dialing. "But if someone's messing around, I need to see." The dispatcher picked up as Andre stepped outside. He explained the situation quickly, his voice low, eyes scanning the shadows. The dispatcher promised to send a deputy, but Andre knew response times could be slow at this hour. He walked cautiously down the sidewalk, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Duke padded beside him, growling softly. Halfway to the playground, Andre spotted the figures. Two men, both wearing hoodies, crouched near a parked SUV. One of them pulled on the handle of a back door, testing it. "Hey!" Andre shouted, his voice firm and loud enough to echo. "What are you doing?" The men snapped their heads toward him. For a split second, everything was still. Then one of them muttered something and bolted toward the sedan. The other followed, shoving his hood tighter over his head. Andre ran a few steps, adrenaline surging, but stopped short as the car's engine roared to life. Tires squealed, the sedan peeled away, and within seconds it was gone, swallowed by the night. Neighbors began spilling out of their houses, drawn by the noise. Thomas Green jogged up, barefoot, clutching a baseball bat. "What happened?" "Who were they?" Andre, chest heaving, shook his head. "Two guys. Tried breaking into a car. They took off before I could see plates." Patricia appeared in her robe, voice trembling. "If the cameras had been working, we'd know who they were." Marlene hugged herself, glaring across the street at Linda's house. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." The crowd that gathered was buzzing with anger and fear. People spoke over one another. "They could have gone after our kids. What if they come back? We're sitting ducks without those cameras." Andre raised his hands, trying to calm them. "Listen, we need to stay alert. Lock your doors, leave lights on, and keep calling the sheriff if you see anything. But the bigger problem is still the same. Those panels are dead." All eyes turned toward Linda's house. Her blinds were drawn tight, but a faint glow of light showed through. Someone muttered, "She's watching us right now." Thomas clenched his jaw. "If this doesn't prove her little stunt put us in danger, I don't know what will." Andre didn't answer. His mind replayed the sight of the two men slipping into the night, the helplessness of having no footage to give the police. He'd tried to be patient, tried not to accuse anyone directly, but now patience felt like a luxury the neighborhood couldn't afford. When the sheriff's deputy finally arrived 20 minutes later, neighbors crowded him, desperate for reassurance. But his response only deepened their anxiety. "Without cameras, there's not much we can investigate. If they come back, call immediately. Otherwise, all we can do is patrol the area." The deputy's cruiser drove off, its taillights disappearing down the main road. Silence fell over the cul-de-sac once more. Porch lights flicked on in unison, as if every family wanted to push back against the dark. Andre stood with Thomas and Patricia at the end of the driveway. But confronting Linda head-on wouldn't just spark a neighborhood feud. It would ignite a storm that could tear the community apart. The morning after the attempted break-in, the subdivision felt like it was holding its breath. Parents walked their kids to the bus stop with nervous eyes darting around. Retirers out for their morning strolls whispered in hushed tones about the car that had prowled through the night before. And for the first time, neighbors who normally avoided conflict began talking openly about the root of the problem. By lunchtime, word had spread that an emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for that evening in the clubhouse. Everyone knew it wasn't going to be about landscaping budgets or pool rules. This was about the vandalized panels, the blackout of the cameras, and the fear that had rippled through the community since. Andre arrived early, Marlene beside him. The clubhouse, usually sparsely attended, was already buzzing with more than 30 residents. The air was thick with tension, voices overlapping in frustration. Patricia sat near the front, flipping through a notebook as if she'd been preparing to speak. Thomas leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, his face hard. At precisely 6 o'clock, HOA President Richard Dawson called the meeting to order. His voice trembled as he tapped the microphone. "All right, folks, let's settle down. We've had a serious incident, and we need to discuss it." Before he could finish, Thomas stepped forward, pointing across the room. "We don't need to discuss who did it. We all know who did it." His finger leveled at Linda Carraway, who sat in the second row, arms folded, lips pressed into a thin line. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Linda's cheeks flushed, but she raised her chin defiantly. "You don't have proof," she snapped. "Anyone could have done that." Andre stood, his voice steady but strong. "Linda, you've complained about my panels since the day they went up. You've emailed the board, confronted my wife, even made speeches about how they ruin the harmony of the neighborhood. And now, suddenly, they're painted black. Do you really expect us to believe it was just a coincidence?" Marlene added sharply. "And let's not forget, the security system went down because of it. Our kids were put at risk. We had strangers creeping through our streets last night." The room erupted. Voices shouted over one another. "She endangered us all! My car could have been stolen! We pay dues for safety, and now we have none." Linda shot to her feet, slamming her hand on the chair in front of her. "You think I wanted criminals in our neighborhood? I did it for property values. Those panels made us look cheap. If houses start selling for less, you'll thank me someday." The crowd booed. Thomas barked, "Thank you for putting our families in danger. You've lost your mind." Richard Dawson tried to calm the room, but the shouting grew louder. Neighbors who usually avoided speaking up were suddenly standing, pointing, demanding accountability. "She should pay for the damages," one woman shouted. "If Andre presses charges, I'll testify," another added. Andre raised his hands, his voice cutting through the noise. "Listen, I don't want revenge, but what happened can't be ignored. My family's been targeted. The whole neighborhood's been left vulnerable. There have to be consequences." Linda's face was crimson now, but her voice shook as she tried to defend herself. "You don't understand. Once people start putting whatever they want on their houses, it spreads. This neighborhood will look like a mess in 5 years. I was trying to protect us." Patricia stood, her voice calm but firm. "Linda, protecting us doesn't mean endangering us. You don't protect children by turning off the lights that keep them safe. You don't protect homes by disabling the very cameras that deter crime. You crossed a line." Silence followed Patricia's words. Even Linda's expression faltered, her defiance shrinking for a moment. But then she shook her head stubbornly. "You're blowing this out of proportion." Richard cleared his throat, trying to steer the chaos. "Here's what we're going to do. We'll vote tonight on whether to hold Linda financially responsible for the damages. And Andre, you have the right to pursue charges if you wish. This community deserves to feel safe again." Andre sat back down, his hands clasped tight. Marlene leaned close and whispered, "They're ready to back you. You don't have to fight this alone." He nodded, but his stomach churned. Taking legal action meant dragging his neighbor through court, fracturing the community even further. But letting it go meant setting a precedent that one person's vendetta could outweigh the safety of an entire neighborhood. The meeting ended with shouts still echoing in the clubhouse, but one thing was clear. The subdivision wasn't just dealing with painted panels anymore. They were staring at a divide that might, but Andre's decision on whether to press charges would become the turning point, one that determined if the neighborhood could ever find peace again. That night, long after the HOA meeting had ended and the subdivision grew quiet again, Andre sat on his back porch staring at the dark outline of his roof. The panels looked like a wound against the night sky, blotched and ruined. Duke lay at his feet, his soft breathing the only sound. Marlene came outside carrying 2 mugs of tea. She handed one to Andre and sat beside him. For a while they didn't speak. Then she broke the silence. "You're thinking about pressing charges, aren't you?" Andre let out a long breath. "Everyone expects me to. Patricia, Thomas, even Richard. They all want me to be the one to make this official. But if I do, this neighborhood turns into a battlefield." Marlene sipped her tea slowly. "It already is. People are angry, Andre. They're scared. If you don't do something, it tells them that what Linda did is forgivable. And it isn't." Andre rubbed his forehead, conflicted. "I don't want to be the guy who tears this place apart. My kids grew up here. They play in these yards. What happens when neighbors stop talking to each other? When it's all lawsuits and grudges?" From inside, the sound of Jordan's laughter drifted through the window. He and Kayla were watching a late-night cartoon, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing outside their home. Andre looked at Marlene. "I don't want them growing up in a neighborhood where neighbors act like enemies." The next day, Thomas came over with a folder in his hand. "Andre, I know you're on the fence," he said, standing in the driveway. "But hear me out. If you let this go, it sends the wrong message. Linda crossed a line, and if she isn't held accountable, what stops the next person from doing something just as reckless?" Andre took the folder, flipping through copies of incident reports, HOA bylaws, even screenshots from the community's Facebook group. Thomas had highlighted messages where neighbors openly blamed Linda. "She's practically admitted it in public." Thomas pressed. "If you file charges, people will support you." Andre closed the folder and set it on the hood of his car. "And if I don't?" Thomas frowned. "Then the neighborhood divides even worse. People will resent you for staying quiet. They'll say you put peace above safety." Later that afternoon, Patricia stopped by with a plate of cookies, her way of softening difficult conversations. She sat at the kitchen table, her voice gentle but clear. "Andre, you're not just deciding for yourself. You're deciding for every family here. We need to know our safety means more than one person's stubborn pride. Please think about that." Andre nodded, appreciating her words but feeling the weight grow heavier. He was being asked to carry the burden of the community's safety, reputation, and future on his shoulders. That evening, Andre called his brother, Marcus, who lived in Tampa. He explained the situation in detail, hoping for advice. Marcus listened quietly, then said, "You've always been the level-headed one, Dre. But sometimes being level-headed doesn't mean staying quiet. Sometimes it means standing up, even when it's messy. If it were your neighbor who had her panels destroyed, what would you tell her to do?" Andre leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. "I'd tell her to press charges." "There's your answer," Marcus replied. Still, Andre hesitated. When he tucked his kids into bed that night, Kayla clung to him a little longer than usual. "Daddy," she whispered, "are those bad men coming back?" Andre kissed her forehead. "Not while I'm here, sweetheart. Not while I'm here." As he closed her door, his chest ached. He knew he couldn't protect his children with words alone. Action was required. But action meant consequences, for Linda, for the HOA, and for the fragile sense of community that had existed before all this began. The next morning, Andre stood on his porch, phone in hand, staring at the contact for the sheriff's office. His thumb hovered over the call button. His heart pounded. One decision could change everything. Marlene stepped beside him, placing her hand over his. "Whatever you choose, we'll handle it together." Andre met her eyes and nodded. "This isn't about me anymore. It's about everyone." He pressed the button and lifted the phone to his ear. But Andre's call didn't just set the wheels of justice in motion. It cracked open a battle that would test loyalties, friendships, and the very idea of what it meant to live in a community. When Andre made the call to the sheriff's office, the words came out more steadily than he expected. He explained the vandalism, the security blackout, and the attempted break-in that followed. The deputy on the other end asked him to come down to the station the next morning to file an official complaint. By the time he hung up, Andre's hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the gravity of the choice he had just made. Word spread fast. By mid-morning, neighbors knew Andre had filed charges. Some stopped him in the street to thank him. Patricia hugged him on the spot, saying, "You did what needed to be done." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder, adding, "Finally, some accountability around here." But not everyone reacted with gratitude. 2 houses down, Sharon Kemp, another HOA board member and Linda's longtime friend, cornered Andre at his mailbox. "You didn't have to go this far," she hissed. "You could have handled it privately. Now you've dragged our neighborhood into a mess that'll be in court records for years." Andre met her eyes calmly. "Sharon, with all due respect, that mess already happened the second Linda climbed onto my roof. I didn't create this situation." She did that evening. Squad cars pulled into the subdivision. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains as deputies knocked on Linda's door. She answered wearing her usual pressed blouse, hair pulled back, her posture stiff as a board. The deputies spoke with her for nearly 15 minutes before finally escorting her to the car. She didn't resist, but her glare swept across the street, landing squarely on Andre's house. The scene was surreal. Kids whispered to each other from the sidewalks, adults exchanged uneasy looks, and for the first time, the community saw their self-appointed guardian hauled away not as a protector of values, but as someone accused of putting them in danger. The HOA convened another emergency meeting the following week. Richard Dawson cleared his throat nervously as he addressed the crowded room. In light of recent events, the board has voted unanimously to remove Linda Caraway from her position effective immediately. Additionally, pending the outcome of the legal process, we will seek restitution for the damages caused to both Mr. Whitfield's property and the HOA's security system. The announcement drew murmurs of approval. Patricia raised her hand and said firmly, "I think it's time this board stops focusing on appearances and starts focusing on substance. Safety, community, respect, that's what matters." Heads nodded across the room. For once, Linda's voice wasn't there to cut through and derail the conversation. Outside the meeting, neighbors approached Andre with a mixture of relief and newfound respect. One man shook his hand and said, "You did what the rest of us were too scared to do." Another neighbor admitted, "I never realized how much we relied on those cameras until they went dark. I won't take it for granted again." Back at home, Andre finally had a technician climb onto the roof to assess the panels. The damage was bad. Several needed replacement, others required expensive cleaning. But this time, the HOA voted to cover the cost entirely. "It's not just your investment," Richard told him. "It's ours too. We should have protected it from the start." Weeks later, when the new panels gleamed across Andre's roof, the subdivision looked different. Not in appearance, but in attitude. Neighbors who once stayed behind their blinds now lingered outside longer, talking, checking in on each other, keeping watch when someone was away. The scare had forced them out of complacency. Andre often thought about Linda during those weeks. He heard she had moved out temporarily, staying with her sister in Ocala while awaiting her court date. Part of him still felt conflicted. She was his neighbor, after all, and despite everything, he never wanted to see her life collapse. But another part of him knew she had brought this on herself. Actions have consequences, especially when those actions put others at risk. One evening, as Andre grilled in the backyard, Jordan asked, "Dad, is the neighborhood safe again?" Andre looked at the glowing panels above them, then at his son. "Safer than before," he said. "Because now everyone understands what it takes to keep it that way." Marlene added softly, "And because your dad stood up when it mattered." Andre didn't see himself as a hero. He saw himself as someone who had been pushed into a choice, and made the one he knew was right, even when it was hard. But while the neighborhood slowly healed, the story of Linda's downfall and months later, the subdivision felt alive again. The streetlights were back on, the cameras recorded crisp footage 24 hours a day, and children rode their bikes in loops around the cul-de-sac without parents peeking nervously through curtains. On the surface, everything looked restored. Yet beneath it all, people carried a memory. A reminder of how fragile their safety had been. How quickly one person's choices had almost undone it. Andre often found himself reflecting on the whirlwind that had swept through his life. He hadn't asked to be the center of neighborhood politics. He hadn't wanted the responsibility of powering the security system. All he wanted, in the beginning, was to save some money on electricity and leave a lighter footprint on the world. But fate has a way of handing people responsibilities they never intended to carry. On a quiet Saturday morning, Andre walked Duke down the block. Patricia joined him halfway, waving from her porch. She matched his pace, and for a while they simply listened to the sound of sprinklers ticking across lawns. Then Patricia said softly, "You know, if you hadn't spoken up, if you hadn't taken action, I'm not sure where we'd be now. Maybe still in the dark. Maybe worse." Andre shook his head. "I didn't feel brave. I felt cornered. But I realized silence would have been worse than conflict. If we look the other way when someone endangers us, we're telling them it's okay." Patricia nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "That's the lesson, isn't it? Safety doesn't come from ignoring problems. It comes from facing them, even when it's uncomfortable." Back home, Marlene was watering her garden when Andre returned. She smiled at him, her voice warm. "Funny, isn't it? Something as simple as solar panels ended up showing everyone what really matters." Andre kissed her on the cheek. "Yeah, not panels, not appearances, trust, community. Knowing that when one person makes a reckless choice, the rest of us have the courage to stand up and fix it." That evening, the HOA held their first regular meeting since Linda's removal. The mood was entirely different. Instead of complaints about paint shades and lawn ornaments, the conversation centered on emergency planning, neighborhood patrols, and ways to strengthen ties among residents. For the first time in years, people left the meeting feeling united. Even the kids picked up on the change. Jordan came home one night after soccer practice and told Andre, "Dad, everyone at school says our neighborhood feels safer now. Like, people look out for each other more." Kayla added, "It's like we're all a big team." Andre smiled at his kids, realizing they were right. What had started as an act of spite had ended as a wake-up call. The community wasn't perfect, but it was stronger than before, because it had been tested and had chosen unity over silence. As for Linda, the court case moved slowly, as cases often do. Andre didn't relish the idea of seeing her again, but he knew accountability mattered. He hoped, quietly, that she might learn something from the ordeal, that protecting a community wasn't about control or appearances, but about empathy and responsibility. In the end, the story of the painted solar panels wasn't just about vandalism. It was about choice. Andre's choice to speak up, the community's choice to support him, and the collective choice to value trust over fear, safety over pride. And that's the message this story leaves behind. When one person's selfish act threatens the well-being of many, silence is not an option. Doing the hard thing, standing up, speaking out, demanding accountability, is what keeps families safe and communities strong. So if you take anything from Andre's story, let it be this: guard the trust around you. Protect it fiercely. Because once it's broken, the cost is always higher than you expect. And if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more true-to-life scenarios that reveal the power of choices, safety, and community, make sure to subscribe to the channel. There are more stories ahead that will challenge you, move you, and remind you of the lessons we can't